Welcome to the Stronger for Business podcast with Divrig Jenkins, Pete Rushmer, and myself, Bev Thorogood. Stronger for Business is a training consortium dedicated to bringing high-quality training solutions to businesses through the combined expertise of our partners. From skills training to developing personal and professional excellence, our mission is to help business owners get the very best from their people at all levels, from boardroom to shop floor. The Stronger for Business podcast is our opportunity to share our knowledge, thoughts and ideas with you, the listener. You'll get to meet some awesome guests from across the business world, sharing their experience of learning and development. If you love what we have to say, make sure you hit the subscribe button on whatever platform you use to consume your podcasts so you don't miss out on future episodes. We'd love to hear from you with your suggestions for discussion topics or ideas for future guests. And if you really love what you hear, please do consider leaving us a 5-star review, as this helps to get the podcast out to a wider audience. Sit back and enjoy the Stronger for Business podcast.
Listeners, my name's Pete and I'm joined today by Bev and Dove, and we've got a fantastic guest to interview today, Greg Baker. Welcome, Greg. Pleased to have you with us.
Hi, welcome. Yeah, really good to be here.
Thank you, Greg. So just before we get on to interviewing Greg, I'd just like to have a bit of a round robin. So what's been going on this week, guys?
Well, for me, it's been a really quiet week. It's half term, isn't it? It's been a short week, but I seem to have been just holed up, really, doing podcast editing, mainly for you, Pete, if I'm honest. But it's been good. I've been learning loads, getting into the more tricky stuff when it comes to editing, which has been pretty good. And today is a bit of a day off as well, because it's my granddaughter's 5th birthday. So we're having a bit of a party for her this afternoon, sadly with no kids. So I'm going to have to be the childish one, I think, and compensate. So, yeah, it's a bit tough on kids at the minute, I think, without being able to see their friends. Normally should be having a birthday party with probably a dozen or so noisy 5-year-olds running around. But we'll do the best we can this afternoon. But other than that, it's been, quite a quiet head down sort of week.
Brilliant. Thanks, Beth. And what about you, Dove?
Yeah, similar actually. It's interesting that, especially if you have got kids, or if you haven't, maybe could imagine it, that although they've been homeschooling for whatever seems like forever now already, it's still a half term, so they're kind of hanging around a little bit, even more than they were already. So from a work perspective, although things are generally quieter, it's been a quieter week. But I've been doing some prep work for some virtual sessions next week. So yeah, still plenty to keep me busy, and the garden is looking great.
Top man. I've had a really busy week too. I've been having a bit of a pivot in the business and launching some new services, including health and safety and HR. So that's quite an exciting time. It's quite busy for us at the minute. But to be honest, I just want to get cracking speaking to Greg. I'm a little bit starstruck, to be honest. So Greg, I'm sure Bev will have introduced you in the introduction, but Greg is the British para table tennis coach for the 2012 Paralympics. And what an absolute star. So to give you a little bit of background, my daughter, Lolly, my eldest daughter, she's got cerebral palsy hemiplegia, and we get to do lots and lots of sports. So I've been so excited about having the opportunity to interview you, Greg, and to hear your input, especially when we talk about high performance coaching today. So Greg, are you able to just tell us a little bit about yourself, please, to start with?
Yeah, I will. Absolute pleasure. It's really good to be on the podcast. So again, thanks for inviting me. So my role is I'm head coach of British Paralympic table tennis. I've been in that role now for around 12 years. I got into high performance sports coaching really from a very early age. I was an athlete, a sort of junior England international from all the way up to around 18 years of age. Moved away from home when I was 12 to 16 to live at a national academy. So lessons of high performance were in my life really from an early age. But I got into coaching very early. There was something for me around
helping other people and being selfless in my approach that really motivated me. And that's really part of my leadership philosophy going forward. So it was less about me, but more about how can I help other people excel and be the best they can possibly be and bring their best self every day to the performance or the environment that they're working in. So that's what I'm about. And I've been in that sort of environment now for the last 15 to 20 years. In different coaching roles, and recently I've tried to take my skills and experiences and lessons learned from performance coaching into the world of business coaching, exec coaching, and some performance mentoring as well with certain organizations. So I am I've been defined as a performance guru or a performance focused individual, because that's been really part of my life from forever that I can remember. But it's one thing that I'm really passionate about, and helping individuals really move forwards in their industry that they're working in.
Oh, that's brilliant, Greg. Thank you. And so when you started out, what were you always table tennis initially? Did you play table tennis yourself?
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of sports, I played all different sports at a very early age. My family got me into sports as really early, 5, 6 years of age, and I was playing football, cricket, tennis, table tennis, and it was table tennis I took a real shine to. I got spotted at a local sort of county event for a national trials, and then was part of the under 12 age group all the way up to under 15s, 18s, 21. So I excelled in table tennis really early. So that was a sport I wanted to focus in and try and make a career out of. So it was, that was the sport that I wanted to really focus. But I've been sporty, all my life. There's something about it that makes me, brings people together. It helps people achieve things that they possibly never thought they could achieve. It is an environment where dreams do come true and dreams are possible. That's something that we use a lot in our work, that, dreams definitely are possible through some of the experiences and stories that I've seen, getting people from, walk through our doors and then 8 to 9 years later actually being on the podium with a gold medal around their neck, which probably at the time when they walked through the doors thought it wasn't possible. So I've seen, some things that you think are impossible come true, and sport's done that to me. And that's why I think sport, no matter what I do in the future, sport will always play a really important part of my life.
There seems to me to be a huge amount of overlap between the disciplines required to perform well in sport and the disciplines required to perform well in business. And there's something that sort of, where I was reading through some of the stuff that you've done, the Carol Dweck mindset came to mind about the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset. So I was interested to ask you, how much sort of emphasis do you think there is on natural talent, and how much on hard work and self-belief? Do you need both? Can you get by with just self-belief and hard work, or does there have to be an element of natural talent in there?
Yeah, I mean, with that, it's a really good question. I think it does depend on the sport that you're working in, if I'm honest. In our sport, it is a very technically based skill sport. So you have to be doing it repetitively every day for long periods of time to really get the fundamentals and principles of the technique and the skill required. There's lots of skills required in our sport that you need a lot of hours with it. And I would say you need some natural talent. So in our sport, it would be hand-eye coordination. Just if you've got that and you sort of get that more than other people, you will be able to excel quicker through the pathway, if you like, to become the best you can possibly be. But that's only minimal. So I'd say around 10% of that is talent. And then the rest of it comes through self-belief. It comes through understanding that growth mindset. And there are various techniques and tools that we use with our athletes and coaches to be able to really implement that within the performance zone. So we use super strengths as a tool. So understanding with individuals, what is it that makes them better than everybody else? What is it they can do to get them to go from good to great and actually set themselves above their opponents? And that's the thing that they focus on. So super strengths is one thing we do there. But yeah, belief and resilience and hard work can be trained, absolutely can be trained. And I think you can implement that mindset within the individual. And part of our philosophy is about power table tennis and within my coaching is getting individuals to really understand what their sort of behavior preferences are. So what do they lead by every day? Is that a logical behavior? Is that an expressive behavior? So that they can then understand how they act under pressure and where their mindset goes under pressure, so that they can adapt and flex what they need to do in the context that they're working in. If we can work with athletes and coaches that are able to make better decisions under pressure, by understanding where their mind goes and having that self-awareness under pressure, then they're more likely to achieve at a Paralympic Games, at a World Championships, when stress and pressure is really ramped through the roof. You know, that's when the world's watching you. You have one moment to perform your best level in, you know, it could be one day. You've trained 4, 8, 10 years for this moment, and that moment could be taken away from you. So the more that you understand yourself and more understand how you're being in that moment, then the more chance you have to perform. So they're the sort of things that we really implement within our coaching. And I've often said it a lot, when we go to the Olympic, Paralympic Games, World Championships, the athletes and coaches that I've seen perform at their best are the ones that are coping with the environment better than their competitors. So if you're able to cope with that, so you understand how you're going to be under pressure and then what you have in place to be able to overcome that and put things in place, then you're more likely to perform and get the result you want to, rather than only relying on your technical and tactical skills, because all of that could go through the window if you're starting to feel very anxious, very nervous, very self-conscious, etc. when you get to a Paralympic Games. You've got to be ready for that. You've got to be ready for how you're going to overcome that if you want to perform consistently in a performance coaching world.
How do you achieve that? Do you achieve that by sort of simulating the environment, or by visualization, or you know, what sort of techniques do you use to put that pressure onto the competitors so they're able to deal with it when it happens?
Yeah, well, first of all, is that self-awareness. So we get them to understand self. We then look at actually through understanding self and understanding where their mindset sits, we actually purposely disrupt the athletes. So this could be through a range of pressure training techniques that we use. So we know if, for example, somebody sits with a very prudent mindset, which is looking at all the what if situations, might look at the threat more than they do looking at the opportunity, we will ramp that up in a training situation. They might not necessarily know that's coming, because then it's around, right, how they're going to react to this. Let's note down how they respond when we do X, Y, and Z in a training session, or we do X, Y, and Z where we were traveling to an airport or traveling to a competition, actually put things in place to see how they respond. And we would then debrief with the athlete, either in the moment when it's happened, or 1 or 2 days after, when we do some reflection as a group setting to understand, you know, this is how you behaved, and this is what we really need. You really need to look to improve. You're going to improve that going forward. So I would say purposely disrupt them. It's something that obviously everyone ethically has to agree with. But we try and put that in place because we want athletes to be stressed. We want them to be pressure to be ramped up, so they feel okay and comfortable with that. So that doesn't become abnormal when they get to a pressure and stress situation. That actually becomes the norm. So what we're trying to do is make the uncomfortable comfortable with these athletes and get them to debrief and reflect with us. And we as coaches then are trying to help them through that process through a range of, yes, at times advising and being quite directive, but depending on who that athlete is, there'll be other times when that's quite open. We're getting the athlete to think of the solution for themselves, and that all comes back to understanding how they learn under pressure better. So our coaching will really how their behavior preferences are will dictate how we coach them. But very much that disruption in training is something that is, I think, across the board now in a lot of sports where coaches are really trying to excel. Because again, if you only focus on your technical training, you could be thinking everything's going well, you've got your technique, you're training hard, but actually when things don't feel normal, when things feels different, because one thing that we say in our sport is that the Olympic and Paralympic Games, we train for it to be actually different than anything else, because it is different. It feels different. There's something around expectation that goes through the roof. There's more media. There's more people getting in touch with you than ever before. The whole world's watching you. So we try and train for that, because if we don't train for that, we know that people their performance could be totally hijacked because they're not ready for that environment or not going to step up to the plate. So we use a lot of disruption. You mentioned visualization. That's something we work with our psychologist on. And we actually are very much high on meditation and mindfulness in our sport. So really getting people to be present in the moment rather than worrying about the past and future. And actually by being present and understanding what their body's going through, they're more able to make the right decisions under pressure. So when there is an opportunity in a match, so when they're competing and they have 30, 40 seconds to maybe breathe, take in what's going on, that will help them make the right strategy and the right tactical approach for the next 30, 40 seconds or the next minute. So the more we can do that, the more we try and implement that within our coaching.
Brilliant.
It's fascinating listening to that, because I don't think, unless you've been in that environment, you can ever imagine, or you've trained and been coached, you can't imagine, like I say, even from a very young age, all that work, all that effort, physical effort, mental effort, all that coaching, all that dedication for one moment. it's incredible, isn't it? It's mind blowing. It really is. What's really interesting to listen to also is the way that you tailor your coaching to the individual as well. So it's very easy, isn't it, to think about coaching in that environment. So I'm the senior person. I'm a senior person in this team, and I have a team to treat everybody in the same way because they're all playing the same sport and they're all athletes. So it's really interesting that you take it right down into a molecular detail almost about how each individual behaves and what their preferences are and how they're likely to react into different circumstances. As a senior member of your team, how important is it to think about working with all the different component parts of your team? Because you mentioned there's the athletes, you mentioned the psychologists as well. How important is that for you as a leader in your discipline?
It's absolutely vital. I mean, firstly, like you talked about there around working with the individual. So the individual athletes, understanding exactly what they need, what makes them tick, understanding how they're going to act and perform under pressure. Because if we only do everything one way and have one program for all athletes, then there's only some that are going to, perform well in that environment, and some are going to fall down. So we have to have individualized action plans, individualized development plans for each individual, so they can really excel. And not only that, when we look at individuals, it's also very important to have individual programs for the coaches that are working with the athletes to really, whenever you're going to start changing a culture, or whenever you're going to start putting new things in place, for me, it starts with self. So the more we can understand ourselves as coaches under pressure, how we're being under pressure, then we're more likely then to be able to influence athletes going forwards and actually help make them better athletes. So for me, it starts with self. And then on top of that, we have athletes that we're working with, but we also have a coaching team. We have the sports science team. There's a senior leadership team. There's a board, of course. We have other sort of consultants come in and add some advice here and there within our organisation. So it's really important that we have one common goal and common purpose. Now, we know that athletes and coaches they're all on different paths, of course, and they're going to have different paths, and some are going to have, get derailed at times and be on different sort of emotional roller coasters. And we get that and we know that. But in order to bring the team together, we have this one common purpose. There's a reason why we're in this together. There's a reason why we're in performance sport, and it is all around being the best we can possibly be and pushing our bodies, outside boundaries that we never thought was possible, and trying to achieve something that we never thought was possible. So that's the thing that brings us together. And that really helps glue the team together. Otherwise, it's very dangerous in the world of high performance sport and coaching, where you can have silos working in different pockets. So you can have the coaching team that are working with the athletes, sports science team that's trying to bring new projects with athletes in terms of sports science. You can have a senior leadership team in terms of might try and dictate where the sport's going in terms of strategy. It's really important that teams within teams come together and come to understand what is the common purpose, and that's where teams can actually work together for the better. And that collaboration is really key, because in my experience in history now, in working across both performance sport and business, if teams don't come together and collaborate effectively, there's only a certain amount of success you can have. In order to build success sustainable and get success after success after success, you've got to bring more people in together, understand their stories, understand their journeys, and start understanding that you can't do it alone. So one thing that we say to our athletes, even though it's an individual sport, in order to you to be the best version of yourself, you need people around you, and you need a support team around you. And you need to let them in, because if you just do it on your own, you'll hit a wall, or you'll hit challenges that you can't overcome. You'll have blind spots that you won't know that you can't see, because you need other people to recognize them for you. So it's really important that we put that into the lifeblood of our sport. Like I say, if you try and do it on your own, you only get to a certain place. But if you bring other people in with you and have that support network around you, then you're more likely to achieve things that you never thought was possible before. And I suppose that is, for me, a big philosophy of performance coaching. It's around people around you and not just yourself. And the more that you can work with people around you and understand what they bring to actually excel you going forwards, I think the more chance you have to bring about change and be successful year after year. Mm-hmm. For me, that sustainability of success. One thing that we noticed after Rio 2016, so we had record-breaking results in Rio, best results we've ever had, gold medals. We've come a long way for the last sort of 10 years to get to that stage. But one thing we were flying back from the Rio Games, and the sort of senior leadership team, so performance director, myself as head coach, said, this is where we're going to have to change more than ever. So we've just had masses of success, but in order for us to keep being successful, we need to change more than we did after London 2012, after Beijing in 2008, or else we're going to stand still, get complacent, and our competitors are going to chase us and get close to us. So what we've found there is that we've brought more people in, we've got more views of the athletes, we've made sure that teams are working closer together and actually wanted change to happen more. We were in a situation there that we've been successful, and we could have just carried on, celebrate our successes, of course, but then just carry on doing what we're doing. And we knew that was a really tricky environment to be in. So we wanted to change as much as possible after the games, which I think is quite hard to do when you've just had success. But if you've got a culture where you're high up on learning, high up on development, high up on pushing yourself, then you're more likely to change. So we had to use our culture to try and implement that with the people that were working with us.
Mm-hmm.
Can I ask, how do you manage egos in all this? So you talk a lot about collaboration, and I was reading an article that you'd contributed to. I don't know if you'd written it or if it was answering questions, and I just made a note. It said, with hard work, collaboration and purpose, results can be significantly improved. But if you've got, you talk about not having those silos and not having, working together as a team. But when you've got athletes who are sort of center stage in that team, how do you manage the egos around that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think in any industry, whether it be business, corporate world, performance sport, we have to understand that everyone has an ego, not just certain individuals. But of course, there are certain individuals that have more media platforms and more attention than others, and that's where the individual management of athletes comes in, because we have to make sure we have to give some athletes some wiggle room, if you like, and let them on a leash in order to do the things that they want to do, to be able to then come back and perform and be able to win medals for them and for the sport. Because if we don't do that and we treat everyone on an equal platform, then I think, again, some people will rebel against that, actually cause more conflict for the team. So it's really, again, understanding what each athlete needs. One athlete might need more time away from training than another athlete. One athlete might want to get involved in some media outlets more than other athletes, and for us, as long as we are managing that and on top of that and understanding that's going to be the biggest difference for them, to give them some time away from the sport to come back into it, then that's key for us. We've learned that over the years, is that especially when I first started in performance coaching, we wanted every athlete to do the same thing. Now, of course, we want athletes to buy into the principles and the values, and they all have a say into that. But when it comes to, everyone trains at the same time, everybody goes to the same competition, everyone's allowed to do the sort of public speaking, etc. What we found doing that is that's not going to be best for everybody. And therefore we had to be more, if you like, adapt with that, give more agility and more time for people to do the things that they needed to do if they were going to perform consistently, because this is a sport and an environment which requires high amounts of challenge, high amounts of repetitive work every single day. There's times when athletes are going to be coming to training and they are not in the right frame of mind to train, but they know they've got to do it if they want to stay ahead of the competitors, etc. So we've got to give them some wiggle room in order to refresh, refocus, and come back fresher in terms of their well-being, if they're going to continuously perform in the future. So managing egos is probably, in my role as head coach or a performance director role, one of the biggest things that you'll do every single day, because everybody's different. And again, you've got to just understand what makes them tick and what's going to keep them doing the things that they do best. And if you do that, then for me, you've got more chance to be successful. But it always comes back to, as I've said before, for me, it comes back to understanding their behavior preferences and their mindset under pressure. If you understand that in your individual, and you understand yourself as well, how you're going to deal with egos and what's actually going to hinder the process here and help the process, depending on how I'm feeling as a coach, then the more chance you've got to flex and adapt depending on who you're working with and get the best out of those egos.
we're only halfway through this interview and there's so many takeaways already. For me, you're just like, I understand every word that you're saying in a business context. A bit like Bev, I've played sport, not particularly good at it necessarily, but from a business perspective, going back to what Bev was saying earlier, this is so relatable and so transferable into business and other organizations, just because it's human behavior, isn't it? All the way through from, and what was interesting actually, and you didn't label it as this, Greg, but it was servant leadership, if you like. And I've often spoken about in the sessions I've done in the past, where typically in an organization, you'll get the structure chart of the pyramid with the most senior person at the top and the most junior person at the bottom. What I think you're saying, and correct me if I've got the wrong end of the stick, but like in good businesses, it's the most senior people at the bottom and everybody is there behind the person who's facing the customer, if you like, or in your case, it's the athlete out there, and the person that the general public and everybody else gets to see. Everybody else is the support mechanism behind that, getting to know them as individuals, supporting and challenging them and giving them the framework and the environment where they can succeed. It's fascinating stuff.
Yeah, and I would say with that, one thing that we try and push forward is that everybody's a leader, whether it be sports scientist, coach, someone that sits on our senior leadership team, athlete. Everyone is the leader, and we want leaders to be able to make those decisions under pressure, because at the end of the day, we're doing everything as coaches and a support team to get the best out of the athlete. But when it comes to the actual moment, it's the athlete that's going to have to make that crucial decision under pressure to get the results that they want. So we need to, in our coaching, in our philosophy, we need to give the athletes responsibility, but they also need to be accountable, but they also need to have an environment where they're making decisions and there is no fear of the consequence of those decisions, because they need to flourish, they need to be able to be expressive, they need to try new things rather than to be quite regimented and everyone doing the same thing again. That's why these individual athlete programs are so key to our success, because everyone's going to go on the journey different to everybody else, but there's still a common goal that everyone's working towards. So that's what brings us together. But we want leaders everywhere, because when push comes to shove, everyone's going to have to step up and make decisions under pressure when we get to a Paralympic Games, and that's the pinnacle of the athletes' careers. And if we do that, and athletes are more self-aware, they more understand how they are when they're disrupted under pressure, they're going to be more likely to make the decision that's needed when the time comes. And again, that decision might be within 2 or 3 seconds, and the wrong move or the wrong tactical approach can be the difference between winning and losing, can be the difference between that athlete carrying on in their careers and actually then having to retire. So it's absolutely critical that we implement an environment where athletes can make decisions and they take ownership of their training programs going forwards.
So it's fascinating how complex and the different layers there are involved in the mechanism and the working that you've been working in within the sport as well. Now, one of the things that I find interesting is there's so many synergies, isn't there? But there's kind of one clear disparity between business and sport, and that is the sort of zero sum effect of winning and losing with the sport. Whereas from a business point of view, we sometimes think about winning and losing, but really it's a bit more infinite than that, isn't it? And it's an ongoing continuous improvement. As you've sort of transitioned more into business, have you seen that as a point of difference, I suppose, between sport and business?
I think one thing that I've noticed in I would say in sport is that athletes are not afraid to fail, or they're not afraid to get things wrong, because they actually know they're going to get things wrong because they're pushing themselves and they're pushing boundaries. And it's that getting things wrong and that failure that actually helps them then propel to be better going forwards. And that reflection of, okay, I've tried this, it didn't work, that's okay, let's try this. And actually from failing in this area, I now have learned this about myself or this about what I'm doing, and I can actually push and learn and improve and keep pushing going forward. So that's one big thing in sport that I think we do really well. But that comes down to what it takes to win. So really understanding, and this is where I think, the same can be transferred across into business, that getting organizations, teams, individuals to understand the fundamentals of what it takes to win in their industry, and not just, that isn't by a habit or by good luck. There's actual fundamental principles of why we're good at something, but then trying to understand what the future looks like. So an organization understanding what are the future principles for us to continue to succeed. What does the future look like? What are our competitors doing? How can we stay ahead of our competitors? And then really understanding how we're going to get to that success. So in sport, we call this what it takes to win. And I think it's a key model that can be used across the board within organizations. So, but then again, it's getting everyone within an organization to align to what it takes to win in an organization. So I said before about embedding a culture where everyone's working together, teams within teams, a common purpose, a common goal. But it's also very important for the organization to understand what it takes to win across the board, that every member, every individual, every team is working towards the same principle and philosophy on that. Otherwise, the organization could be going in different directions because one person thinks winning is this way, one person thinks success is this way. So it's very important that organizations, individuals are aligning to a core philosophy of what it takes to win in their industry. And that's one thing I've seen can really help in the business world, that sport has really propelled with that over the last 10 years. Because it's around funding. It's around if I leave as a head coach, or if the senior leadership team in my sport leave tomorrow, then the people coming into it will be able to know what it takes to win in that sport and be able to carry on that philosophy, rather than a new head coach coming in and bringing about their own new philosophy, which might go against everything that the previous head coach has done. There has to be fundamentals in order to be sustainability. And that for me is one big thing, that the lessons that can be learned both ways, both in business and sport.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me that the purpose is very clear from a sporting point of view. If you're talking about Paralympic Games, or if you're talking about the European Championships or whatever, the goal, the vision, the purpose is crystal clear. And I think in business, sometimes that goal and that vision isn't so clear, or certainly isn't articulated down through. To get everybody on board, you've really got to be clear about your vision and your purpose, and live and breathe that vision and purpose, not just have it pinned up on a wall somewhere in somebody's office.
Yeah, and that for me, that is exactly the culture that I think high performance sport does excel in. It's making sure that everyone has a say within the values, the principles, the vision of where we're going, rather than it being something that has been dictated to by a senior leadership team or whoever, chief exec. It's actually, this is all come from the athletes, and we're there to actually give the athletes the best opportunity, environment, context to be able to thrive in. So yes, that having the right values to work towards, but then it's very important that people that are living and breathing it. So once those values are set up, once those principles are in play, you're relying then on people that in the organization that are on the shop floor, if you like, so in the training hall, like the coaches, sports scientists, to live up to those behaviors and be accountable if they don't, and actually get called upon. So if you've got an environment and a culture where you can be called out, so we call this a psychologically safe place. And our culture is we would say psychologically safe, because we're not afraid to give feedback to and actually receive feedback if we're doing sort of behaviors that we said we don't want to see, or if we're not living up to the principles that we said were actually key to how we want to be successful moving forward. So we're quite open with that. It took a long time to get to that position, but that's got to be led by everybody, and everybody's got to be responsible towards it. Because if you're moving an organization forwards, everyone's responsible, not just 1, 2 or 3 people. It's everybody in there. And in order for that to really happen, you've got to let people on the shop floor have an opinion and have a say on what happens at an executive level, and vice versa. And if you have that environment and people aren't afraid of that, and not afraid of that conflict, then I think you've got the best chance to be successful. And I've just mentioned conflict, and that's just remind me that we go and try and find conflict. And I think this is the same with we don't shy away from conflict. Conflict's a good thing as long as it's managed in the right way, and it can be done where people aren't taking it personally, etc. But conflict is needed if you're going to keep pushing and keep getting to the areas that you want to get into. But of course, that doesn't just happen within days. That happens when you build a culture over a certain amount of years. But it all comes back to those values and leading by those values every single day, and get called upon if you're not, and to change that so that everybody's accountable and not just a few people within a team.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting you said that it's taken you and probably all sports teams a while to get to that point, because you can't insist that people are accountable. You can't insist that it's a safe place. You can't insist that everybody is trusted and can be trusted as well. It takes time and reinforcing those beliefs and continually making it psychologically safe for people. So, like I said, if there's somebody on the shop floor says, "I actually don't agree with what we're doing," constructively, you can say that to the CEO or the operations director. There's no fear that going back to what you're saying earlier, that somebody that in a more senior role, their pride's going to be dented or their ego is going to take a bit of a bashing. It is just feedback, because often people like athletes or people on the shop floor in a business, they're the ones doing the operational stuff day to day, and they're the ones at the pointy end. Often it's just really important that over time that environment of trust and everything else that comes with that is something that is part of the overall strategy, the overall goal, because it's how we behave is probably more important, I think, to what we actually do, because it's our behaviors and our attitudes are the things that are going to drive culture forward.
Yeah. And I mean, I'd say on top of that as well, it's embracing vulnerability. So coaches to be able to share things that we don't have all the right answers. We're not perfect. And I think athletes like that. They like to see that we're human and we're not robots. And the same with athletes, embracing where they're struggling, where they need help with. And if we do that, you're more likely to go the extra mile for each other, because you build this relationship and you build a connection that's stronger than what you've ever experienced before. If I open up and embrace vulnerability and share a story with an athlete, and they do the same, when we're under pressure and when we're feeling it and when we're at the biggest moment of our lives, we're going to trust each other. If I make a call to, for example, in our sport, you can have a timeout during a match. If I make that call, that athlete's going to trust me because we've gone through a journey together, we've shared things together, and we've built up this relationship where we feel as though we're invincible. But if there's no sharing of stories and vulnerability, then it makes those decision makings, when the pressure's really ramped up, very difficult. And people, you'll go the extra mile for each other if you are able to share that and open up. And it probably goes into then, in our sport, we've talked about well-being being a performance advantage rather than a nice to have. It's now a need to have. It actually helps towards performance. So how we're being, how we're behaving, but also what we're doing to look after each other and look out for each other. So we have a buddy up system when we go away to competitions. That will be, there'll be certain people that we're teamed up with that we're looking out for, understanding what stresses them out, understanding when they're, if someone's going quiet, for example, that's normally quite expressive, then there could be something that's quite on their mind, etc. So we use well-being as a way that's going to keep people performing to their best. And that's absolutely key for us, because that is everything. If we look after us as individuals, as athletes, as coaches, as support staff, the more likely we are to keep fresh, keep understanding where to maximize our energy rather than just running around wanting to put energy everywhere, where we're really going to make a difference to what we do. And that does come back to having an environment where we can share, have an environment where we can collaborate, and an environment where opinions are a good thing rather than opinions being a nuisance because people aren't doing. But actually we need to spend more time being, and if we spend more time being and sharing, then the doing becomes easier anyway.
Mm-hmm. Greg, can I ask you how you're sort of coaching your athletes through the current climate? So certainly for businesses, the whole COVID-19 issue, a lot of their visions, their goals, their plans for this year have been devastated, and they're dealing with the emotional and the psychological impact of those changes. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think 2008 you didn't have a great success, but by 2012 you'd made great improvements, and that's continued to get stronger and stronger. So 2020, I'm guessing, was a big thing. It was going to be the next big success. How are you managing the change?
Yeah, it's again a great question. It's something that probably over the last 10 to 12 weeks, for obvious reasons with the lockdown and the restrictions, is where we focused on significantly. Obviously your technical training and tactical training has gone out the window. So where can we add most impact? And that has been, there's coaches that, we're looking to potentially retire after the Tokyo 2020 games. There were athletes that were looking to do the same. There were athletes that, potentially were looking to start a family. So there's ethical dilemmas there. And these conversations have all come up over the last 10 to 12 weeks. And one we've been around, what's most important is well-being. It's around your personal choice, your personal life is the key here. Performance actually comes second now. Whereas before performance was everything, performance comes first. The sacrifices that athletes and coaches make are significant. But actually now that's swapped around over the last 10 to 12 weeks, because it's about the individual and it's about where they want to go and their well-being and their life, and making the right decisions for their life and for their families. So that's been our key to how we've approached this situation. What's obviously makes it easier for athletes and coaches that do want to carry on is that the dates have been moved now. So the goalposts have been moved a year. Yes, it's 12 months down the line, but at least there is something set in stone. And when there is something set in stone, that's when athletes and coaches can replan. They can look at all the competitions they want to go to, what the training is going to look like, how they're going to peak towards the competition. So we have an end goal which helps people in performance work towards. But absolutely, the amount of conversations around what's going to happen. Am I going to, some athletes, we're talking about peaking in August, September time this year. Are they going to be at the same level next year? Are they going to be able to perform at their best next year? What's that going to look like? But then we have to say, we can only control what we control. This is the same for everyone around the world. The competitors are in exactly the same position. So again, it comes back to whoever can cope with this situation more than anybody else. The more we can look at this as an opportunity to maximize relationships, to look at the ways that we work when we go back, to actually increase and improve our culture. So now bringing what can we do when we come back to actually excel in this moment and move the team forward through our values, through how we bring the team together. It can actually be a good thing the last sort of 10 to 12 weeks. And we've tried to use the positive and the opportunity of it to move it forward when we do get back. So yes, there are challenges because athletes will building up towards this time. But if we look at it through a different lens and we look at the opportunity rather than the potential, the failing of this or the potential difficulty of this, then there's always that motivation and that engagement that athletes will definitely buy back into next year. But of course, it's a challenge. And don't get me wrong, there are some athletes that, still might say, I can't carry on for another year. I was going off into a different career. I've got athlete, and we have to respect that and understand that. There's absolutely no forcefulness to keep athletes engaged in the program because, there were things that they would have put in place. But at the same time, the athletes that do want to carry on, then we just have to make sure that we're putting things in place to get them as best prepared as possible and increase their confidence and self-esteem to these new dates. But again, like I said, it's the same for everyone around the world, and whoever can cope with it better than anybody else, I think will be the ones that really come to the forefront and perform the best in the games next year.
Mm-hmm. The bounce back ability that we spoke about in episode 5. I think.
That resilience,
Absolutely.
isn't it? Yeah.
And what's quite for athletes anyway, they're quite used to this. Obviously, this environment and situation is totally new, but in terms of the unknown and the uncertainty and dealing with complex issues, it's what athletes do. It's what they're made of. It's what it's what the gold medalists and the medalists at games live for. And the ones that can excel in an environment that is totally unknown and they don't know what the next day is going to bring in terms of uncertainty, then they're the ones that are going to be the best athletes. So this has brought obviously ramped up that twofold in terms of the uncertainty, but the athletes are used to it. They have that resilience. They understand setbacks, they understand failings and how to come back stronger, and actually learning from their failings to make them stronger for the future. So it's something that we've reminded the athletes on, that yes, this is something we've never seen before, but actually in the context that we work in and what we do every single day, this is something that we're all stronger. And if we use those skills now to tackle this situation, and we're going to be in a good situation when we do come back into full training and back into competing for the games.
And that does translate very well into business, doesn't it? And one thing I picked up before was, they've still got something to look forward to. They've got something to work towards, albeit the goalpost has moved, been pushed to the right by 12 months. But I suppose in business as well, if you can reset the target, reset the goal, rather than focusing on what you've lost, look at what opportunities. My simple brain was thinking, actually the athletes have now got an extra 12 months to build on what they've already done. That might be a bit naive, but I'm sure there's other things going on there. But I guess from a business point of view, being able to focus on or reframe that loss to, okay, what am I gaining from this? Well, actually, I'm gaining a bit of extra time to be able to put different plans in place.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely right, because the way that we're looking at it as a senior leadership team for next year is, you know, what would we have wanted to have done differently that we currently couldn't have done if the games were this year? So actually, just like you said there, that we could be in a better position come August, September 21 than August, September this year. So we took it as Tokyo take 2. So all the preparations that we had in place, we're now looking at them for this year and go, actually, in hindsight, we could have done that better, and we now could focus on culture, or we could look at behaviours in the sports, or we could look at the competitions that we go to. And so we've actually come up with plans that will be in a better position from an operational training and competition plan that we had compared to this year. And then that goes down to the athletes. However, we've asked the same questions to the athletes. You know, you've got a chance to re-prepare now for Tokyo. You know, in April and May of this year, 2020, what would you have liked to be? Where would you like to be different next year compared to this? So in 12 months' time, when you're looking back, these are the things that I've done. These are the things that I've adjusted. And athletes are starting coming up with plans and solutions and being creative now that they didn't probably have 12 months ago, because we get stuck into the day-to-day grind of 2 training sessions a day, gym sessions, you know, and we go back to that doing. Now we're being more than ever in terms of being creative. So we can actually put better plans in place, and athletes are being more expressive than ever. So it's absolutely right. We are confident that we'll be in a better position in terms of our culture, in our values, how we work together as a team, how we're collaborating, but also in our preparations leading up to the games, because of the time that we've had to really reflect and think about where we're going, what we're doing, and how we're going to get there.
That's the difference between a high-performing team and a normal team, because I suppose in businesses and in other disciplines as well, it's very easy, and has been very easy over the last couple of months ago. What's the point? We'll just kind of sit here and wait to see what happens. But like I said, it's using that time wisely, you know, the thinking time, because you can't do the do, but it's now kind of reframe, refocus, revise the strategy, and drive forward for the future and take advantage of it. Absolutely. Can I ask you a question then? Just bear in mind you've had potentially an extra year to at least think about it. What do you think the medal tally will be?
So was the
we can edit that out, of course.
From generally from a GB perspective, you know, not just looking at my sport, but looking at the whole of Olympic and Para, I think they'll do really well. I think they'll hit the same medals as we did in Rio, if not more. I really believe in the system, high performance system that we've got in Great Britain. It's come so far over the last sort of 15, 20 years, from Atlanta when we got 1 gold medal to now winning multiple gold medals, you know, 25 plus gold medals in Rio, you know, and then the Paralympics become second in the medals table. So I think we'll hit the same sort of medals. For my sport, particularly my sport, I think we would do very well. I think we've got athletes who are going to be peaking at the right time. We're going to make sure the athletes that medalled in Rio, we've got time now to get them even more on track for Tokyo, as we talked about before. So I think it'll be something similar to what we did in Rio, if not a little bit more. If we can get, we won 2 gold medals in Rio. If we can get gold medals again, fantastic. But we actually think we've got more opportunity to win more medals and not just gold medals. Mm-hmm. So there's more breadth now. So over the last 4 years, we've been able to develop more athletes, get them more exposure and experience at competitions to compete against the world's best. So we've got more opportunities going into Tokyo, which has given us more confidence that, you know, in our sport, if we're not relying on 1 or 2 athletes to come to the forefront, we've actually got a team, a strong team that can all perform when needed and all do it no matter what the situation. So the more opportunities they have, the better, obviously, chance and return of investment, if you like, when you get to a games.
Absolutely, I'm excited for you.
Thanks.
Okay, I've just got one last question. I just wanted to round back to something you said earlier, which was it was almost throwaway, and I just picked up on it. I was like, I definitely want to round back to that, and it was around the selflessness of coaching. And your selflessness and viewpoint on it as well. And are you able to just explore that a little bit more for me, please?
Absolutely, yeah. It's part of my philosophy, really, about performance coaching, that it is everything that we do as coaches and I do as a coach is for the athlete. So you have to be unbelievably selfless. You know, you're not doing it selfishly. You're not what you do shouldn't be, as a coach, shouldn't be what the impact. What you do shouldn't be on your ability to move forwards. It should be on the ability for athletes to move forward. So you're doing everything to influence athletes in the right direction, and give them advice, give them mentoring, give it questions for them. And it also probably goes back to the point I said, that if you really want to start influencing people, if you really want to start influencing a culture, then it starts with you. It doesn't start with somebody else. So if I go into trying to adapt and change a culture, there's no use in me going up to people and saying, you need to be this way, if I'm not going to change first, and I'm not going to look at myself and understand how I need to be for this culture to change and adapt. I often say that athletes and coaches that work in this environment, they don't need to hear it, they just need to see it. And if they see it, then they'll be able to move forward. So rather than saying, as we said before, you need to do X, Y, and Z in this culture to excel, if they see that as exemplary from senior figures, leaders, coaches, then they're more likely to want to get involved in that as well. And that's where that selfless come from, is that what we're doing here is everything for the athlete. It's not about the coach, it's not about the performance coach, not about them, it's about the athlete. And that is why in the world of performance coaching, you'll see performance coaches really excel. You'll see them doing everything possible, working really long hours to get athletes to be the best they can possibly, because they have a passion for developing athletes. But of course, on top of that, when you are selfless, the downside to it is you're doing everything. You can be working yourself into the ground. And when we come back to that well-being, so now we have to have that pause and reflection to go, yes, it's about the athlete, but what are we doing to keep our energy high and maximizing our energy, which will then give the athlete's best chance to perform, rather than just keep work for the athlete. It's very important that we do have that reflection time to understand where we're putting all our energy and maximizing that energy, which goes, yes, that's still selfless, but it's looking after ourselves to give the athletes the best version of ourselves. And if we give athletes the best version of ourselves as coaches, then they'll have more chance to perform consistently at competitions.
That's resonated so much with me, because I literally, before I came on the call today, and something I was thinking about, I saw a quote: "You have to serve first before you can lead." I thought that really resonated with me when you said about the selflessness. So, Greg, thank you so much for joining us. Where could our listeners find you, and sort of from a day-to-day point of view, how can we point them towards you?
Well, if anyone wants to get in touch with me, then my email's gregbaker at 198 at hotmail.com, gregbaker198 at hotmail.com. My LinkedIn profile as well, they should be able to find me there if they want to look at my profile. But also my other email, gregbaker at britishparatabletennis.com. If anyone's interested in getting involved in the sport from a support staff, coaching or athlete point of view, then by all means, get in touch. I'm actually doing some exec coaching with Barefoot Coaching Limited, so the associate coach with them, which is a great company as well, in terms of an exec coaching, and also Manchester Metropolitan University, so a range of different, as well as the Premier League. The Premier League's a great place that I'm working on in terms of some mentoring, so if they want to get in touch with me that way as well, they can do. But yeah, they're really happy, and thanks for inviting me on to the podcast. I think it's been an hour. It seems like it's just gone off in 5 minutes, but
it does, doesn't it?
It goes quick.
It does fly by. Yeah. You're a very busy man, Greg, I must say, and maybe another time we can explore the Premier League side of things, because football's my bag. But
okay, I'll bail out on that one.
I really appreciate it. Just to conclude, then, Bev and Dove, what are your learnings this week?
Well, I think mine have all happened in the last hour, if I'm honest.
Absolutely, yeah.
Just so much to take away from that, and such a lot of overlap between the sports world and the business world. Loads for me to go and think about. In fact, I'm probably going to listen back to this episode over and over, because I think there's so many little gems in there, Greg, that we'll just keep picking them out. But I think the learning for me is really from today is about that, there was something I read of yours, Greg. I haven't been stalking you, but I have been reading a little bit about you. There's a Q&A you did, and the advice you gave was to work hard every time you train, remain focused on your long and your short-term goals, be ready for a journey, as their ups and downs along the way to success. And you know, when I read it, I thought that has got to be the simplest bit of advice ever, and probably the most powerful, because everything in there is so simple. It's just not easy, is it? But yeah, brilliant. Too many learnings to talk about, Pete. Sorry. Thanks, Greg.
Yeah, thanks, Beth. What about you, Duff?
For me, and this is a really good case, so there's been a few examples this week, is that people are really willing to collaborate. And I don't know if it's happened more so since lockdown, but sometimes if you want some help, just go and ask somebody, and the worst thing they're going to say is no. So like Craig and I we only connected on LinkedIn not even that long ago, weeks ago realistically, and we were talking about which Greg guests could we have. I asked Craig, and he said yes. He could have easily said no, but I'm glad he didn't, because that was a really, really good interview. That was fascinating. But I think just collaborate. If you're struggling, or if you want some help with something, it doesn't have to cost anything. Just go and ask. And I think that's going to be particularly important for people in all disciplines, not only this year, but into the future as well, because things will continue to be tough. If you need some help, just ask. I think collaboration, going back to what Craig said, because we spoke about that in the interview as well, collaborate, don't always compete. And the worst thing somebody's going to say is no or not no. That's definitely a big
Definitely. I think for me, Greg's crystallised three things there, and the collaboration's one amongst different teams, and making sure that people collaborate, and certainly the vulnerability that really, really resonated with me, and finding that human connection to be able to lead and have that trust and build through vulnerability and sharing stories, because that's something personally that I've struggled with is sharing my story with people, and being able to build that. So that really resonated, and along with what I alluded to earlier around the selflessness, and that really crystallized that quote around you have to serve first before you can lead. I think what we've talked about absolutely embodied that as well. So Greg, you've really made me think. So fantastic. Thank you very much for joining us. Really, really appreciate it. And thank you everyone for listening. We'll catch you again soon.
Thanks everybody.
Thanks very much.
Bye everyone. Thank you for joining us on the Stronger for Business podcast. A final thought before we go. In the words of Henry Ford, anyone who stops learning is old, whether at 20 or 80. Anyone who keeps learning stays young. So stay young and join us next Friday for our next episode of the Stronger for Business podcast.